Welcome to Sober Dad Crew, the podcast where we talk about all things sobriety, recovery, parenting, music, tattoos, work, and more. For more information, please visit soberdadcrew.com. My guest this episode is Joshua Thomas Gandee. Josh is a bartender, runner, creative, and podcast host who has worked in and around the restaurant industry for over a decade. Josh quit drinking in 2017 and began creating a non-alcoholic culture in his city and beyond. Josh, welcome to Sober Dad Crew.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be on.
Yeah, and I should jump off first by saying congratulations on your nomination for the Spirited Award. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Thank you. Yeah, it's something I'm trying to stay incredibly humble about, but at the same time, I'm like doing backflips in the back of my mind because it's an incredible honor to be nominated for that. Nominated within the top 10 for my podcast called No Proof, which is about sobriety stories within the hospitality industry, and it's been one of those things that I've looked for a nomination each year, but I always like had that feeling of like, well, maybe I'm just not ready. So when it kicked in this year, I was super thrilled. I just hope that it really kind of like gets the name out there for more individuals that need to hear the conversations or know somebody in their lives that could benefit from hearing the conversations.
Yeah, that's really cool because there's in the general podcast world, there's the Spirit Awards, and I look at that every year, and then I go, I don't have the $400 to like put towards this, submitting my podcast. So I just kind of shrug my shoulders and go, well, people are noticing, that's cool. But, you're so genre specific that that's really nice, and nice that award actually has a category that your podcast fits into.
Yeah. And there's even a larger kind of like category that falls into. It's podcast within the spirits, industry. So, I could be on there talking about old booze, or I could be talking about like new techniques within the bar world. So the fact that something about sobriety, something that has kind of like really come up in a lot more conversations with individuals within that industry, having enough of a name and enough of a prominence to kind of like fall into that category really speaks volumes for where we're at as an industry and kind of like where we're at with the conversation.
Yeah, I've talked to Derek Brown, who I know you talked to, and I've talked to Chris Marshall, who, you probably know, who's the Sands Bar owner. There's just, when I got sober, 14 years ago, it's just seltzer, and I worked in the wine industry in upstate New York, really before where I am in my career now. I sort of got into that when I was a stay-at-home dad with my now almost 21-year-old. So I get that world, and I get the enjoyment of this beverage paired with food and all that's about. So it's been really pretty exciting to just have these other options. And almost everywhere I go now has something that's pretty interesting, and it's not just a crappy mixer. I mean, sometimes the work events that I have to go to, they're like, oh, how about Sprite and, orange juice or something lame like that. But most restaurants now are doing something that's pretty interesting. I mean, my wife and I went to a show, I guess a couple of months ago. Dave Hawes, who's a sober dad who I've interviewed in Syracuse, that club had a whole, lineup of NA beers. So it's out there, and it's very cool.
It's kind of interesting that you brought up a concert, because I see that like most of the venues that I go to, that's where they're lacking. I think my options are usually like a Gatorade or a Red Bull, which, that doesn't really scream live music to me.
Yeah, and this was a very cool little club, but right up around where I am, there's Beacon Skiff, which is a cidery, and then there's Omegang, which is an enormous brewery. And, through my channels, I've been told that at a show at Omegang, they probably sell $40,000 in beer in one show because they're enormous outdoor venues. So I've been to Beacon Skiff, and, they had coffee and donuts. So that worked for us for the gig we were at. I have not been to Omegang, but oftentimes you are just relegated to kind of not good options.
Yeah. I mean, there's even been an explosion. I mean, my sobriety is half of yours. And even when I started, like there was seltzer, but I think that the big thing was bitters and soda or the mocktail, and not the mocktail as we know it today, the mocktail that was mimicry and just meant to,
Yeah.
it was like the conversation wasn't there. So it was like, just make me something that looks like what I usually have because I don't want anybody to ask me any questions about why I'm not drinking.
Yeah, there's a place I went to in Ithaca for a while. I don't know where that bartender went, but he knew I was sober, and I'd just say to him, "Make me something delicious," and he was into it. And he kind of had his own line of some vinegars early on before anyone was really doing that for his own alcohol mixing. But he liked the challenge, so that was really cool to just have something kind of interesting and just custom made for me, and good for the bar's bottom line. I mean, seltzer just you don't charge much for it. And there's another bar in Ithaca that I like that's sort of a grown-up bar. They actually don't charge for seltzer. They have a great menu across the board, and also tea and coffee and all that kind of stuff. So I call it the grown-up bar because Ithaca's a college town, so you can actually
Yeah.
go there and sit and have a conversation with somebody. Well, let's back up for a second because I normally start with these questions. I'm going to go to them now. And so the first one is, how many kids do you have?
I have one, and he is 8 months old. So this, fatherhood and sober dad is a brand new game for me.
Yeah, cool. And congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, 8 months is like, I do like me some babies. I have a vasectomy because between my stepkids and my other kids, I have four. So like,
Oh, wow.
I do not, and I'm 53. I do not need any more children, but babies are cool. They're just like so cuddly and all that stuff. So and my oldest is almost 21, and I say to people, it feels like a blink of an eye. Like it
Yeah.
just feels like coming home with that kid and going, "Oh my God, like what was I thinking?" Like this small human being, and then like sleeping with the light on.
Yeah, I've been hearing that, and I'm getting a sense now of kind of really how quickly things happen because it felt like just a second ago, he had to be held every second, and now he's crawling all around the living room, and I have to have more of a watchful eye, and it's so quick.
Yeah, and your stuff moves up. All the stuff you don't want broken, like
Oh
goes
yeah,
up in 2 foot increments. You're like, nope, that's got up. Nope, that's got to like go up again.
yeah. I just picked up a new TV stand last weekend for that reason because there's now nothing can be swiped off of it.
Yeah, there you go. Did you always want to have kids?
I don't know that I always wanted to have kids, but it was never no. And that took some kind of like deep soul searching for me and my wife. We've been married. Yesterday was our seventh wedding anniversary, and I feel like every few months or so we would have a check in, and it was, "Are you ready? Do we want this?" And for the most part, it was like, "Not now." It was never kind of like a steadfast no. And kind of like 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, we had that check in and she was a maybe and I was still a no or still a not right now. And, I went away from that conversation. I was like, man, why is she maybe and why am I still in this place? Like, what's holding me back from, feeling the same way that she is? Cause, it wasn't that we like didn't talk about it in between. And I started thinking about like what I was fearful of fatherhood. And the biggest things that like popped up was just, it could be boiled down to schedule change, things like the, the ways that I carve out my day being a little bit different. And like nothing that I was thinking about was like actual fatherhood, the like raising of a person, of, imprinting values and exploring who I am and passing the things that I love about myself like down to them. It was all just like, well, you usually do this on Thursdays. And when I kind of like realized the insanity of that fear of change and like the most minute detail, I was like, I'm probably more ready for this than I've ever been. And, especially at that point where I was kind of like 5.5 years sober, I've had a lot of like uncomfortable conversations with myself. And, they tell you you're never ready, but I felt like I was the most prepared that I could have ever been. And my not right now quickly became a maybe. And now, thankfully, we have little Arthur in our lives.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think I admire your process with your wife. I think that is pretty incredible. And I think as someone who's been in the parenting game for a while and through a divorce and now, sort of collecting four kids in this new model, like those kind of ability to have good conversations within you don't have to be married, but with your partner is so huge. And I do think it's true that you're never quite ready because I mean, it is a profound change. Like, I do not binge watch a lot of television shows anymore.
Yeah.
Like here we are, 9 o'clock at night, recording. As I said before we hit record, I'm back from soccer practice. It just, your schedule's a little bit not your own. But I think the flip side of that for me has always been it is such a gift to be called dad.
Yeah.
I also think it's an earned title, not a given title. I feel pretty strongly about that, but it is just such an incredible, journey. And I think you learn so much about yourself, like through your kids, if you're open to it.
Yeah, that's what I'm realizing is that you have to remain open. Like, those parts of you, those little valves that you used to have closed off, like have to remain open all the time because, for me, it feels like nothing is ever the same. One of the things that I was afraid of, I was like, everything's going to change. And then when I flipped that, I was no longer afraid of it. I was excited by the fact that yes, everything is going to change because I had the realization that like, yes, everything will change, but not everything will change at once. And that is a feeling that I've walked through before. And deciding to become a parent like was the next time that I had to kind of like reckon with that feeling. And when it came up again, I was like, oh, you've heard this, you've said this before, like you understand this. It makes a lot more sense. And I think like another thing too, the schedule being, somewhat torn apart is I was leading a lot more of like a calmer lifestyle, I would say. I feel like I talked to a lot of people that had kids like rather young and I think they were still leading a bit of a lifestyle that like having a kid like upturned that in a lot of ways. But for, me and my wife were relatively older. We're both in our mid to late 30s and having a kid just felt like welcoming somebody else to the couch.
Right.
It
Yeah.
didn't feel like it blew up all of our plans and stuff that we were
Right. Yeah. The couch is big enough
yeah.
for a little squishy person. I
Yeah.
mean, they start to take up more couch, and they definitely, they learn what your buttons are. I mean,
Yeah.
your kids can press your buttons like nobody else. And I remember with the oldest, because we're so similar, I was like, man, if we're not careful, we can just poke, 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 poke. So there's a real lesson in there about, how to take a step back and look at the whole situation and like, am I battling this over ego? Right? Am I just trying to win this, or am I trying to actually like help this young person grow? And so that's been, I think that's sort of a constant challenge once they get a little, verbal. Toddlers and teenagers, very similar critters, just different sizes and different abilities to slam doors. But I think it's that openness to think. And I think for me, the journey of sobriety, though I got sober after the older two were born, but my stepkids, they don't know me any other way.
Yeah.
Right. And that journey, like, and I think we're similar in this, that I just stopped drinking one night. I was like, this is bad. I'm done. But then there's a lot of therapy in there of unpacking all the other stuff, which for me was really tied up with anxiety, a failing marriage at the time. But like having gained those skills, they really do help as a parent.
Yeah. I keep kind of like having the mantra in my mind of, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And
Yeah.
I kind of have that balance between them.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Can we step back a little bit? Can you sort of talk about, your journey with alcohol? And obviously you had, and still have a career in hospitality. And in listening to your podcast, I know that there's a lot of people you talk to, and it's, as Anthony Bourdain used to talk about, it's like it's a pirate ship
Yeah.
in some of those kitchens.
Yeah. It extends all the way to the bar as well. Yeah. I consider hospitality to be the first real job that I ever had. I had done retail here and there, but hospitality was the first thing that I had ever taken seriously. But also within that, there was, a party atmosphere. And it's pretty easy to slip into that when you realize that you are working an alternate reality to the rest of the world. Your days off are different than regular 9 to 5ers. Your hours are different. The first time that I stepped out of hospitality and had to like go to Target at 11 on a Saturday, I was like, what is this? What happened out here? But it just makes it easier to kind of like fall in with everything that is around you. But it also makes it really easy to kind of have that Groundhog Day effect, which is the way that I talk about it a lot. Because your job essentially is to, facilitate the needs of others. And then at the end of the night, you clean up in such a way that you make the place look like nobody had ever been there. So that way, when you open up the next day, you're starting from scratch. And you do that physically and mentally as well, at least my circles, we would sulk the same way that we would celebrate. If we had a bad night, we would go out and we would drink about it. If we had a really good night, we would go out and we would drink about it. And it's really easy to like get carved into those pathways because the rest of the world is so opposite you. It's really easy to kind of like keep going out with the same crew and doing the same things. And when your life is on repeat like that, it makes it really difficult to take a step back and, take inventory of the way that you're feeling, the way that you're treating yourself, the way that you're treating others, the way that you show up in the world. When you really kind of like dedicate all of your time to being a bartender, like that's about it. It really kind of like took me almost turning 30 to really kind of like have that recognition in things. I had taken some time off here and there. I would do like sober October, I would do dry January. But for the most part, I was an everyday drinker. And it wasn't because like I felt the need to do this. I didn't feel like a pull to drink or I'd get the shakes. It was just like, that is just what I did. It was every day because that was the people that I was with. It was the way that I would calm down, after a hectic night at work on my couch. I just kind of like slipped into those ruts without ever thinking about it. And, the October of my 29th year, I took it off. And at the end of it, something about it felt better than it had before. And I was able to kind of like recognize like some slight weight loss. Like I felt a little bit more clear headed. I started exercising a little bit more. And then I was like, let's try November too. So 1 month became 2 months. And then at the end of November, I only have 1 month in between my 30th birthday. And that's when I started getting the first kind of like inkling that this might be a forever move for me. Cause I was like, if you've done 2 months, why not a little bit longer? And when I was approaching 30, it was the first time that I had ever kind of like stepped into the shoes of my father. My father died when I was 7 years old and he was 39 years old. It was unrelated to alcohol. It was like a freak heart attack while he was at work. But it was the first time that I had ever been close enough to that number to kind of like see that it was possible to go beyond it. His father died at 40, also like heart conditions. And when I was really kind of like making eyes at that, I was thinking like, you got to do everything that you can to like outlive, to outlast, to just like keep going. So I kind of decided then and there that I would get myself an early birthday present and stop drinking. So my 30th birthday was my first ever sober birthday since I was like 16. And that felt really good. But at the same time, like if I kind of just like plucked myself out into this new universe, it really kind of like made me question if I could keep going to work every day because my life was alcohol It's all I talked about. It's all I educated myself on. I consumed a lot of it. And I was having this kind of like thoughts of, can you do this without drinking? And, the longer that I kind of like pondered that and sat within that moment, the more that I kind of like got depressed because I was thinking like, you have to give up everything because you made this one decision. But then I was able to step through it and think that, you're not in any of these positions of leadership or these steps in your career. None of these articles have been written about you, and none of these people are giving you these chances and these opportunities because you drink. It's everything that you do in between. So when I was really able to recognize the fact that when I removed alcohol, nothing that I liked about myself went with it. That's when I really was able to kind of like put my foot down and was like, I'm excited by hospitality. I want to get back to hospitality in any way that I can. And I want to become a better bartender, a better employee, a better person. And that was kind of like the day that I struck the match.
Yeah, that strikes me with, I talked to Ian Blessing and I've talked to Derek Brown, and they talked about similar things, but it reminds me that end piece I was reading. I was sitting waiting for a meeting with someone. And I was flipping through this book on leadership that they had in the office. And one of the things was, if they took away your title, would people still follow you? And I thought, that's pretty interesting, because
Yeah.
I want to be the person that they don't follow me because, for me, I'm the director of business development and marketing, right? Great, that's my title, that's my job. But I hope, and I work hard at people follow me because I'm a good person and I care about like the workplace being a good place to be. We're there a lot, right?
Yeah.
We're there more than we're many other places. Um, so that just, it feels like you're in this moment, and it's cool that people are finding those spaces within those careers to not have to shift, and that you're finding like actually what resonates about you to yourself, but also to other people.
Yeah, it was really exciting to just see the way that, my staff interacted with me after that, because for the most part, we would talk about partying or we would talk about bars or drinks and things like that. And when I, removed that, the things that people brought to me were like, hey, I went on this hike. I think you should go check out this trail. It's really awesome. Or I read this book that made me think of you. Or I just watched this movie that I think you should check out. And it just became, more familial than it had ever been. Which, if you would have asked me if that was possible, I would have said no, because I would have said that like that feeling resides in those moments after work when we're all kind of like around each other. But we were able to bring conversation to each other and learn more about each other um, without the presence of alcohol. And that was really big for me.
Right, because you realize the thing you thought was the glue wasn't actually the glue, right? It's
Yeah,
actually what's in
exactly.
people's hearts. Do you have a sober house? Is your wife sober too?
For the most part. So she had really kind of like, she never drank a lot as is. She would have like maybe a couple a week or whatever on the couch. And then when I stopped, it wasn't something that we had like decided together. So for her, it was kind of like business as usual. And for me, it was kind of like good that way because it was a sort of a test. I was just like trying to figure out like what my triggers were or where I would really kind of like crave it. And luckily, like I never really had cravings. I never like had the want or need. But what I missed was kind of like experience. I wanted to be involved in toast. I wanted to be offered something. I wanted to have something tasty. But during the pregnancy, she obviously didn't drink, and then after that, she kind of like had less and less interest for it. So I would say for the most part, we are a sober house. I still keep some stock to make for people. We host a lot, so I make drinks. I always make an NA, and if I know that people drink, I'll offer them something. But I always offer NA first. It's my I try to trick everybody into into drinking non-alcoholic.
Yeah, I mean the stuff is so good now. I mean, I was never a beer guy, so I don't really do those, but like the seed lips and that stuff, that they've got sort of the viscous quality right and interesting on the mouth and in the nose. Like the stuff that's coming in now really is just kind of incredible. And I do wonder, looking at my kids, especially the older ones, and the younger staff where I work, there seems to be an overall a lower interest in alcohol
Yeah, I
right
think
now.
people are learning more about it. No one ever asked any questions about alcohol. At least I didn't. I never thought about what I was ingesting, and even removing alcohol taught me a lot about my my time as a drinking person. I would often want the first drink, but all the drinks that followed was just the sake of like social anxiety or not knowing what to do with my hands, or I'm in this place, so I should just like keep ordering something. Um, that's what I like. I like being able to order something that like tastes great, and then I can keep trying other things without disappearing while while being in the same room.
And driving home safely without
Yeah,
fear of a
exactly.
ticket or
Yeah,
arrest, really. I mean,
yeah.
I grew up in a house where there was 2 jugs of Carlo Rossi wine, a Chablis for my father, and a rosé, which once you realize what a rosé really, I don't even know what that stuff was, but
Is
it
that a
came in these
blush?
a blush, an enormous, jug, like milk jug sized things. But we'd go to my grandparents every year, and there's always the cocktail hour, always those things, and even my grandfather in his later years, he would have at least one martini every night. And as he got older and shakier, he started to make his martinis in a mason jar,
Oh,
so
wow.
he could screw the top on and not spill them, which is pretty MacGyvery for
Yeah.
your drinks. But he served in World War II. So those were certainly very different generations. And also, as a kid in the 70s, the level of smoking was really high. And now
Hmm.
that's really gotten away. So I'm wondering if alcohol is starting to have this moment of a little deeper dig or exploration of the side effects, right? There was this marketing stuff for a while of like, oh, drink red wine. It's great for your heart.
Yeah.
There's like all the sort of pseudo research, but actually the research really shows like zero alcohol is probably from a health and long life and like brain health kind of thing, your best choice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even with like cigarettes, like, you had the marketing first, you had people not thinking about it. And then when you had enough science coming out proving that it was bad for you, like I think we're on the turn of that for alcohol. And, I even want to say, like, I'm not anti-alcohol. I think people should be able to make the choice to consume if they want. It's still something that's very fascinating for me. I'm still learning as much as I can about alcohol in all different areas. And, I still work within the spirits industry developing cocktails. And, I do a lot of like photo and video work for education for bartenders. So it's still a very fascinating thing for me. So I don't want people to think that I'm anti-alcohol, but, you know, you should it is the devil, so I do feel that people should educate themselves about what they're consuming.
Yeah, and I think, each to their own, and I definitely feel that a little bit in the way of weed being legalized. I've never smoked weed. I've never had any interest in it. If that's what people want to do, that's great. Please don't drive.
Yeah,
That's always been one of my, do what you want to do, but please don't hurt anyone else in the process. Um, but right, I mean, you're not gonna convince people or force them to do it. I mean, I think as a parent too, you try and educate your kids, and as they get older, you can't expect them not to try something. I mean, most of the people I know that have never consumed, like in the straight edge community, are that way because they grew up in houses that were like full of addiction.
yeah,
And so they became these punk kids, and their survival mode was to say, I'm never, ever, ever, touching that. But I think as a parent that struggled with you know, alcohol, it's also important for your kids to know that and
Mhm.
say, like, I'm not telling you do or don't do something, but be aware, you know, the genetics of this thing can be real. So you just need to like be attentive to this. But also, even if you're a teenager and you're somewhere that you drank and you need a ride, or the scene's bad and you need a ride, you got a no questions asked ride.
Yeah.
Like you, I will pick you up anywhere at any time. And I think that's part of that openness and safety and all that, that you just, you know, you work as a parent to really kind of develop that thing and that openness with your kids.
Yeah, because I had the opposite. I would go to parties in different cities, and then turn off my cell phone. So I really don't want that for my kid.
We didn't have cell phones when I was a teenager, I must confess. They were like attached to the wall and they had like cords.
Yeah, I was the first like the very first cell phone.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, with a kid it's almost 21, and like, you know, these sort of almost these 21, 17, 12, and 8. So there's almost like a 4-year break between all of them. And their cell phone experiences are all pretty different. The oldest
Yeah.
two, a lot, because between the oldest and the now 17-year-old, the touchscreen became a thing. And that interface was so fluid for a little kid. It just sort of almost became an extension of their hand and their brain.
Yeah.
And the oldest one didn't have a touchscreen initially. And because his mom and I split, he had a cell phone like way before any of his peers, because we wanted him to be able to call us whenever he wanted without having to like ask
Yeah.
for our phone. So I think now most kids, you know, maybe he was 11 or something. I don't remember how old he was, but now most kids by 11 or 12 have like an iPhone. And who knows what your kid's going to have, you know,
No.
like brain implants or something, but this Mark Zuckerberg or like be in his head. I don't know. It's an interesting time with all those technologies and, you know, kids on social media. It's own interesting. I'm just like trying to scare you now.
Thanks. I'm very afraid.
Yeah, but who, like, it's so many years before he'll even be like doing that. It is sort of sociologically interesting to think about, like,
Yeah.
what is that world going to look like in, you know, 10 or 11 years?
Yeah, because I was the transition. I experienced both. So like the internet and phones were introduced kind of like when I was probably like 12. So it's strange to be able to understand both, but to think about it as now and what he'll be walking into, like it's impossible to know.
Right. Like, you know, who are the generations? Like, I was obviously born, you know, no internet, no even inkling of that, right? The generations now that existed before those technologies are greatly reducing, you know?
Mhm.
I mean, when did I graduated from college in 94, and I had I think my first email my senior year, but it was like on the Unix system or some weird thing at the school. And then it was like a number of years before I ever had my own. And then it
Yeah.
just, you know, then at one point it was like one cell phone for the family, but you still had a landline. Like, I don't know. I guess my parents, but they're in their 80s, have a landline. There's not a lot of people with landlines anymore.
Not a lot of businesses with landlines anymore.
I know. Not a lot of businesses, and this is a pet peeve of mine, and totally just a side rant, that actually have human beings answer the phone.
Yeah.
Drives me nutty when I'm trying to call another firm and, you know, reach my marketing colleague, and all I just land in a endless phone tree. You can't ever get to a person. It's just very annoying. Where I work, we have a person answer the phone. It's quite nice.
Yeah, I feel like we're like 5 seconds away from entering a Jerry Seinfeld bit. Like, where did the zero go?
Yeah, I know.
Zero
Right?
doesn't
Just
take you anywhere.
couple old guys talking about the good old days. One of the things, and this was in your bio, and you talk about kind of working to create like a non-alcohol culture. What does that mean to you? And like, why do you think that's important?
Yeah, that actually started before I even stopped drinking. And it was, you told a similar story about the bartender that you would go to that loved the challenge. That started for me like in one of my early bartending days. It started with actually pregnant individuals who came in and wanted something. And the first time that it happened, like I was in no way prepared for it. I was like, oh God, yeah, I guess I'll make you this. And so the first few like NA drinks that I made were, just improved lemonades. And then I think, with my own kind of like competitive mindset, I wanted to outdo that. So it became really important for me to like think about ways that I could offer somebody something that didn't have alcohol. That way I wouldn't have that kind of like panicked deer in the headlights look on my face again if they ordered something, and then make them something that they weren't excited about. Like that portion of hospitality has always been really important for me, is that, we are welcoming people into our space, and it is up to us to be the stewards to have something available for everyone, and make sure that everybody can feel comfortable in some way. So that's kind of like where that stemmed from. And it was just kind of like making things available. And then it was making sure that I was approaching it the same way that I was foolproof cocktails, and, building things with intention, creating cocktails that had names, creating cocktails that were listed on the menu the same way as other cocktails. That way, if you're not drinking, you don't have to look at the same section that a child would, and only be offered sodas. Like I never wanted to diminish anyone's time out just because they decided to not drink. So when I decided to stop drinking, it didn't feel like I had to kind of like step into something huge to kind of like create that in the environments that I was working, because it was already a part of the hospitality that we brought into the building. So I think from that statement that you've talked about that's in my bio, it's making sure that conversation is being had all the time. My podcast is ran through a group called Focus on Health. And a big thing that we do is educating bartenders on the importance of non-alcoholic and, low proof options on your menu from a P&L standpoint, making sure that where you're working is making money, because you don't want to leave any money on the table for, not offering any beverages, and also talking about the consumption behind the bar with bartenders. So we talk about kind of like the financial health of the establishment, and the mental and physical health within those doors. So it's keeping that conversation alive, and just making sure that people have them offered and that they're built with intention, because having those things available like only creates more excitement about your place, about your bartenders, about your offerings, and just kind of like keeps that buzz going within your city or drinking community.
Yeah, and I think it's important in a lot of ways. I think I live in upstate New York, outside of Ithaca. Ithaca is probably too small, and maybe this will start to shift, but it still feels too small to probably support a totally NA space.
Yeah, I think that can be difficult.
It's
Here
a
is a
college
huge
town.
city.
Yeah.
Columbus is a huge city, and we tried to have one, and it lasted all of 4 months. And I think it can be difficult. There's a lot of things at play that contribute to the rise or demise of spots like that. And I think that for me, I'm just make a good bar with good options first, and then hear the need for a fully NA bar.
Yeah, and I think then it's welcoming. I know, and I do appreciate not everybody in recovery feels like they can go in those spaces, and
Mm-hmm.
and that is a challenge, and trying to find places for those folks as well are important. It might not be the total responsibility of the restaurant world and the bar world to answer that question in whole. I mean, I think the answer is what you're talking about, which is creating very recognizable NA options. There's so much out there. I was interviewing the owner of the Empty Bottle in Chicago, who's, he got sober after owning the bar, and they have an extensive NA menu. And he said, the year that I guess I interviewed him last year, he said they'd seen 600% growth in their NA sales. I
Yeah.
mean, certainly that probably, in part took away from the alcohol sales, but it also means they created a space that people are going to. I mean, if you walked into any business and said, I've got a plan for you to see 600% growth in a sector, they'd be like, sign me up, and he really talked about in detail how they, crafted those menus and ways to make sure there's never a mistake. No alcohol accidentally with someone, that someone could really feel certain that what they were getting was alcohol free. But I was blown away by the growth of that. And that's a music venue in Chicago largely. So it's, people going out to shows, and, maybe they just don't want to have a beer tonight. Maybe it's a Tuesday, right? And it's enough that they're going to be out to midnight and have to kind of get their butt out of bed for work the next day. The last thing they want to be is overtired from alcohol. Or maybe it is just somebody who does not drink for any myriad of reasons, which I'm grateful. I think that we're now exploring. There's a lot of reasons people don't drink, and we don't always have to ask people why. It's just
Yeah.
okay that they don't drink.
We don't have to ask why, or we don't have to make those assumptions of why they don't drink. For a long time, if someone said they didn't drink, they were either pregnant or you were anticipating a disaster story.
Right.
And I think the fact that I didn't have a disaster story kept me quiet for a really long time. I just didn't tell my story because I didn't think I had one.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Because I quietly kind of stopped, and I've told that story on here before, but I did sort of feel like, I didn't hit rock bottom. And my wife was like, well, everyone's version is different, right? You got to the point that you knew you needed to change. So call that what you will. If you want to call that your rock bottom or call that your whatever you want to call it. You and I had a moment, and yours really related to what you're saying about your dad. Like, we had these moments that we just were like, wait a second, this is not going in a good direction for me or my family.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even for those that are on the fence, to be able to hear somebody say, I stopped because it felt good, or, I stopped because I like the person that I am without it. Like, the more that we're able to hear those portions of the conversation, the less people are going to feel embarrassed when they want to try a non-alcoholic cocktail, or they want to, pick up an NA beer at the store. Or they want to go and contribute to that 600% at the venue. They aren't fearful of the question coming up of like, why don't you drink, or why aren't you drinking right now? It's easier than ever for people to even kind of like cycle in an NA drink to their normal like round of alcoholic drinks at the bar and stuff like that. So the time has never been easier to kind of like dip your toe in the water of sobriety. And I think a lot of that has to do with what we experienced in the pandemic as well. Like, we were literally sat in rooms by ourselves with nothing but time and open-ended questions. It's funny to think about, like, in the beginning, so many people went in one direction with kind of like, whenever happy hour can start at X time, like, who cares, we're not doing anything. And then I think when the reality set in of how long this thing could really last, people were like, okay, maybe we'll take a step back from all of this. But I think people were able to kind of like look at themselves and start understanding how they themselves could be an investment. You're investing in your health, and you're really kind of like questioning what you're putting in your body, like what you're consuming, like what is written on the packages of these things. And I think now more than ever, people are asking a lot more questions, which allows them to find a lot more answers within themselves. And alcohol is, one of those things that people can take a look at and make a more well-informed decision for themselves.
Right. And it might not be totally cutting it out, right? There's a spectrum, I think, of which people can be healthy. For me, I knew, it was very medicinal in quality, and that wasn't working. And so I stopped. But I think the pandemic too, there was some extremes there, right? Because the research is showing, and in New York State, right, the bars were doing takeout, and liquor stores were deemed essential businesses and stayed
Yeah.
open. Um, so it was super available to people. So I think some people re-examined it, and some people went like way, way far in the other way. And I get it. Like for the first part of that pandemic, I hadn't met my now wife yet. We met during COVID. And so my kids were with me every other week. So, I was working from home. It was me and the cat every other week, and you'd go to the grocery store. I would go like early on Saturday morning at like 8 a.m. when it just opened, when it was me and all like the super old people. It was a really weird, weird time. And you're like, I'm
Yeah.
watching so many Star Trek reruns. I'm like, there was so much empty time that I was grateful at that point that I was so solid in my sobriety that it wasn't even like didn't even blink for me. But right, like workplaces were doing Zoom happy hours and all
Yeah.
that stuff. And and work still is a place where alcohol has an interesting relationship. I mean, I really push my workplace, in the architecture world. There are these things as pinups, and on a Friday, once a month, people show their work and they get out the beer and the wine. I'm like, well, let's make sure, people are driving home from the office, that we have some other options. And I'm not even asking for anything fancy, just like get some seltzers and some soda
Yeah.
so people have a choice and don't, feel weird about it. But, I'm very public, like in that job, more than any other job I've ever had. I was just really quiet about it in so many other jobs over the years because I was afraid of sort of getting judged. It was that what we're talking about, the sort of label that went with it, or are you a risk? And I was a single parent, and I didn't want anyone to think that they had to be concerned about me and question me and that I might, lose my job. I lived
Yeah.
in terror of that for years.
Yeah, I could see that being quite difficult, especially like, it's within the hospitality industry and you see it elsewhere as well, but like people view alcohol as a reward as well. So it can be dangerous when it's kind of like viewed as this prize that you get at the end of like, busy work week or end of like a busy day and stuff like that. It's tough to kind of like rewire um those moments where you're just like, what we really want is to just be together and to celebrate our efforts. But what some people view it as is like, cool, we get to go chug hard on
Right.
Friday.
Yeah, yeah. And that relates to parenting too, right? There's been a lot of, I mean, I really don't like this term, but it's talked about a lot, like mommy wine culture. But I
Mhm.
think that's a thing. And I mean, it gets very like gender role lockdown, but also like dad's watching the game and I'm going to have my beers. I mean, that's so like really gendered and not in a way that are my views of the world, that binary view, but it is really a thing, right? Like alcohol is really integrated. Like, oh, thank God the kids are in bed. Let's have a drink.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's strange because I even quit with the intention of drinking again. I had this kind of like hopeful notion that like I would remove it long enough until I felt comfortable welcoming it back into my life. And I think I associate that to the fact that I was making plans for a version of myself that didn't exist yet. At the time, it felt comforting to think that, maybe one day you'll get back to this thing. But now I'm so far removed from it that I would never want to welcome it back. You even referenced the, like cannabis use. When I first stopped drinking, like I tried, uh, like doing edibles and, I even like started smoking cigarettes for like 3 weeks to just because I thought that I needed that kind of
That
like
was a good
Indiana
health.
Jones,
That's a good
like,
health
yeah.
transition.
Well, I was like, I thought I needed that like Indiana Jones, like sandbag moment. I was like, this
Yeah.
is gone. I need to supplement it with something. So I saw those as less dangerous for a moment. And that was like very short lived. And now, I don't like feeling anything, within my mind and body, that I didn't, I create myself through, whether it be like exercise or just kind of like my own emotional enjoyment. So like, especially now that I'm a parent, like the last thing that I would ever want would to be under any sort of influence and have something happen and know that I can't either react or give like the best of my abilities because of something that I have like consumed. Like that makes me so afraid to even kind of like consider that happening, even though I know that I would never do anything to make that a possibility.
Yeah, I remember I get migraines, and there was a point I was on an antidepressant and I couldn't have my traditional migraine medicine. So the doctor gave me, I don't know, like Tylenol with codeine or something. And I took it once and it fucking knocked me out. And I was like, I never again. Like
Yeah.
I cannot take this and be a parent. Also, that could have easily been super abused because doctors are not always good at like looking at all those things. So then I ended up like pivoting the antidepressant so I could take the migraine medicine, which
Yeah.
probably was a better choice and probably one that the doctor should have just looked into. But yeah, the clarity, like it's hard. It's like hard being a parent. Like being a parent is not always easy. Be the kid 8 months old or 18, right?
Yeah.
It all comes with their challenges. Like sometimes the baby's just gonna cry, and no matter what you do, it's hard and it's tiring, and you need to be on your game.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't imagine, I now wake up so much earlier than I ever did in my whole life. And I can't imagine like entering that feeling like also hungover. Like it seems insane to to add that weight on yourself.
That's also just old man syndrome. Like I cannot, like if on a weekend somehow I sleep to 8 o'clock, it's like a
Yeah.
miracle of miracles. Like, like how did I even sleep to 8 o'clock? Um, yeah, it's like a funny thing as I've gotten older with that. But right, you are, and I drink coffee still, but a lot of people cut out all that stuff. But it is like nice to wake up, to go to sleep with clarity and wake up with clarity, and go to sleep being present to your family and wake up that way too. Is
Yeah,
and so you
absolutely.
greet your kid or your kids with like joy every day, even if you're frickin' tired.
Yeah. Cause like, my little dude's just he's gonna bring his best every day. So I gotta
Yeah,
try to match him the best that I can.
right. Like he doesn't even know any other way than just to like exude love, even though I don't know, he can't name it obviously, but I believe they feel it, right? I mean, that bonding with the baby is like real and it's pretty quick.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a feeling that I've never felt before. Like I'll enter a room and I'll see his little face and he'll like smile at me and I'll have to like look around like, wait, me? And it's
Yeah.
just like it's a love I've never felt before. It's really incredible.
Yeah, and I it's so true. And it's so I think so hard to explain if people don't have a kid. And it's interesting for me also like having these new kids in my life, that I love as though they're my own. Like there is something about when you're open to like parenting, I think with empathy and passion and compassion and all those things, like you feel that love and you can build those relationships, because it's definitely interesting to come and parent a fully formed human being.
Yeah.
Like you didn't change those diapers, you didn't hold that baby, so you're like coming in with someone who you didn't have any influence for years and years, and like trying to build a relationship. It's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine. See, there been some movies written about that subject.
Yeah, right. Maybe I keep like, should I write the memoir? I don't know. We'll see. In all my spare time, I saw someone that runs a theater in Ithaca yesterday, and he's like, "How's it going?" I'm like, "I'm just really busy." Then he asked me to be on his board. He's like, "Oh, right. You just said you were really, really busy." I'm like, "I'm really, really busy," which is fine, like, but between work and all the things family, and I'll circle this around too, back to parenting, is that you have to just give of your time and yourself, right? Like we sort of joke, right? The time is not our own, but also there's the gift of that is to be able to have somebody call you dad, or mom if you're the mom, and that all like kids want is to just be loved and supported in their
Yeah.
varying ages.
Yeah, and I'm excited to provide that. Um, I feel like, especially with my dad passing when I was 7, there's obviously a ton that I missed out on. So I'm also really excited to kind of like see the way that I react and interact in those times of change when, I didn't have somebody there, just to kind of like see what more I could give somebody by, having two parents in this situation.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I did spend so many years as a single parent, and I get along with my old dude mom. We get along great. We really are co-parents. But now being repartnered, I'm like, oh, it's so much better doing this with somebody else. Like, I'm able to be so much more present. I mean, financially, it's huge too. To like, oh, there's like two incomes here. This is kind of
Yeah.
incredible. But to just have like backup or just support or any of those things, it's huge. And I think for the kids to, and this is not against anyone raising their kids on their own, you can do it and you can do it well, and it is hard. But there's times like kid just wants one of the other parents for whatever reason, whatever issue they want to talk about it. They want to talk to mom or they want to talk to dad. Um, yeah, so it's just easier in a pairing.
Yeah. As of right now, it's really nice to just be like, hey, can you put end to bed tonight? Like
Yeah.
being able to pass something simple like that off is nice. So I can only imagine what's to come.
Yeah, though bedtime's pretty magical. Like kid bedtime, I found like a lot of, as they get older, a lot of interesting conversations at bedtime.
Yeah. I've
Like,
never read Lord of the Rings, so I'm really looking forward to doing that and telling everybody it's for his sake and not mine.
you can also read that on your own. So it's okay, but it is cool to explore those things or like share the things you love, like music or whatever. I mean, with the older ones, Harry Potter was such a thing, and now Harry Potter's become a little sadly problematic
Yeah.
because she just turned out to be kind of a whack job, and anti-trans, which is shitty because those books were really meaningful in my family. So we sort of struggle with that. Like, how do you deal with that? That's a whole like side conversation, but it is in
Yeah.
in parenting. It's interesting to do those things. I mean, I played a lot of music, so I was like hoping, my kids would be into that. And with the older ones, it just wasn't. And there's an interesting letting go of that because my job's not to like tell them how to live their lives. My job is to support them in how they want to live their life and the things they want to do. I'm like the cheering section, right? I'm not the like, well, you need to play guitar because like I always wanted to play guitar and blah, blah, blah. No, it's not.
Yeah.
That's not what they're looking for.
Yeah. I'm really excited to kind of like be that guide because I have no intention of trying to press him into something that I've laid out already.
Yeah, and just to finish up here, where can folks check out your podcast? And I'll put a link in the notes and all that stuff. But I've been super enjoying yours, even though I don't exist in the hospitality world anymore. I think the conversations are bigger than that. What you're doing, and I think people should definitely check it out.
Yeah, it's been really great because it's quite a collection of individuals that appear on the show. We all arrive to sobriety in different measures, but it's really great to be able to listen to somebody and see the ways that we all celebrate the other side of that and the things that we really get to enjoy and champion the people that we get to become through all of it. But No Proof is available on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was great. It felt surreal to speak as a parent. It's the first time I've kind of like been on record with that. So thanks for letting me stumble through that.
Well, we should do a follow up in a couple of years too, and just like see where you're at, because I think that would be fun.
Yeah, you can see how much gray hair I have.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, you can see there's many on my head. Thanks for listening. Sober Dad Crew is a DIY project by Stephen Kimball, who writes, edits, and produces the show. To support the show, please review it where you listen to podcasts, or visit soberdadcrew.com to buy some merchandise or make a donation.